Greetings, people. This is Kiss Shardy Gaming Nation in the building, in the house. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the video and to see more content. Now, before we begin, I want to let the people know I do a whirlwind of content because I have a lot of life experience, and when it comes to dating and mating, gaming, entertainment, politics. When I was growing up, I dived into each of those categories as far as learning what they were and what they're about. And I'm a history buff and I'm a knowledge buff, and I'm always inquiring and asking questions about things. So I'm going to do a whirlwind of content because I can speak on a lot of content. So you're going to see me do stuff about gaming. You're going to see me do stuff about politics or dating or relationships. You're going to see me do content about a lot of stuff, right? Because knowledgeable of different aspects of game or sectors of game. So I'm going to talk about a lot of stuff, right? But in this video, Assassin's Creed Shadow disrespects Yasuke. It's a DEI or real tough storytelling. I remember when this came out, there was a lot of illogical hypocrisies going on, especially centered around the character Yasuke. You had the white boys and the Japanese kids who had racist ideas and thoughts, saying, "Oh no, Yasuke, he was a mystery character. We don't know who he really was. But what we do know is he was a slave. He was a pet. He was a weapons bearer. Basically, Oda Nobunaga's a caddy. Basically, being racist. Just hiding their racist language behind. He was basically a pet. The thing is that if you didn't know who he really was, and he was a mysterious character, you don't know if he was a slave or a caddy too. You don't know. Let me fix my damn glasses. I don't know, bitch. You really don't know. You yourself don't know. And regardless of the historical accuracies of depictions being said by them about Yasuke, they still want to ignore these things. Meanwhile, acknowledging John Henry Blackthorne and other white characters that have been involved in this in Japanese culture in their prior games. And the whole premise was that Assassin's Creed has historical accuracy. Assassin's Creed has never been it has historical references and timelines, but it's always been fantasy interjected into it, right? And we're gonna break that down today. So let's begin. Make sure that's there. Okay, cool. So y'all can hear me here. I can hear me and see me there. I wish I could test my voice. But anyway, let's keep it going. Let's go here. Assassin's Creed has always been fiction, right? Yes, it uses historical backdrops, but it's ultimately a sci-fi time-traveling story. Because remember, in Assassin's Creed, you're in the Animus and you're going back in time to see what was going on in those time frames, right? Based on alternative universe. You can, right? So it's historical timelines and spaces, but it's fantasy added into it. It's an alternate universe of things happening into it. Why is that? Because in logical real history, nobody's jumping off a 50,000-foot building and landing in some damn clay or damn water or damn hay barrel and surviving. You are getting fucked up. You're not living. We talk about fucked up. You're dying. Anyway, built on Assassins versus Templars, not strict historical accuracy, right? So when people, now you can say the Assassins are a group called the Mechanics and the Templars were somebody else, right? So when people suddenly care about hyper accuracy, only when a black man like Yasuke appears as selective outrage. And it's not rooted in gaming tradition. It's rooted in discomfort with black leads sharing space with their version of historical fantasy, right? They had no problem with Ezio being a supermodel level ladies' man in Renaissance Italy, Bayek speaking modern English in ancient Egypt, Altair with a Christian Arab accent in the Holy Lands, Edward Kenway, a white pirate running around Havana. But Yasuke is unrealistic. That's not historical critique. That's gatekeeping through cultural bias. Again, Ezio, let me put my face up here. Ezio is not a real character. It's a made-up character put in an alternate fantasy universe of maybe a historical space or timeline. Same with Bayak, right? Same with Altair, a Christian Arab accent in the Holy Lands. Right? Remember at that time you had the Christian Crusades versus the Muslims. You know what I'm saying? A Christian Arab. That's a paradox. Arab culture and Christianity are two different things. Right? Edward Kenway, a white pirate running around Havana. Right? But Yasuke, now it's unrealistic. That's not historical critique. That's gatekeeping through culture. But remember, Edward Kenway, he was able to go to like ancient indigenous villages and shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on. But Yasuke, now it's unrealistic. That's not historical critique. That's gatekeeping through cultural bias. All right. Yasuke was a Trojan horse to prop up female lead Noi. Right. And this is what speaks to what I say is that. So let me read this and I'll speak my own opinion. Right. Now, because I have ADHD, I have to put my thoughts down on PDFs to basically organize what I'm thinking and what I have to say. And then I will throw my talking points into ChatGPT, and then it gives me a chance to break down what I thought. Right. So shout out to ChatGPT for that. Before I used to write essays in my notepad when I used to do live streams on here, right? I used to do essays on a whole book, whole notebook, and then I would break down what I say in my essay and then correct talking points like that. And I used to take up the whole book. So shout out to modern day technology and shout out to ChatGPT, right? My opinion that Yasuke is being used as a setup to elevate Noi, the female ninja, is valid, and I'm not alone, right? Ubisoft trailers are marketing barely highlight Yasuke's perspective. Instead, they focus on Noi's inner conflict, Noi's journey, Noi's stealth mechanics. Yasuke is real, Noi is completely made up, and yet she's the narrative focus. Now, the reason why I say that Ubisoft disrespect Yasuke, because you're taking a character that was historically accurate and you're using it to, as a way to, one, if you are being woke, you're ticking off a box to say you created a black character. And he wasn't the main protagonist. He was the side character to Noi. You used him to advertise a made-up person, a Japanese female, because you know that in Japanese culture, they're more patriarchal. I don't know why y'all couldn't have made a male Japanese character and a female Japanese character. Why did you need a black person to advertise Japanese culture and to advertise that made-up character? Instead of making a black character that represents the African diaspora, Afro-Caribbeans and Black Americans combination, and tell the stories that went down here in the Western Hemisphere, that went down here in the African diaspora. There are plenty of stories, plenty of slave rebellions from Jamaica to Haiti and Black America. Plenty of stories of you had slave revolts and the Jamaicans going through different islands. And you know, when you had that movie that starred Mutabaruka called Sankofa, and Mutabaruka, he had a red hat on, a maroon, and he went to another slave plantation in America to help free slaves. Why you don't tell these stories? There are plenty of these stories. You know why? Because you use Yasuke, a historical character, to now prop up Nai, or to advertise Nai. Because you know that you wanted to tell a story about a female character, and you know that most of the gaming industry wouldn't watch it. So this is why it's a disrespect to Yasuke and to black people and to black men. Because you could have made a game with Yasuke by himself, and you could have made a whole character arc or story, right? If Ubisoft wanted to make something story about Yasuke, you didn't even have to put him in the Assassin's Creed universe. You could have created a whole other universe and then insert Yasuke in it and then create his own storyline or arc to it, if that's what you wanted to do. Centered around him. All right. This smells a lot like modern AAA tactics where a black male lead is used to show diversity, but the actual emotional depth, reliability, and story arc is handed to the female character. And the black man becomes a sidekick, protector, or tool for her growth. That's not real representation. That's optics marketing. All right. So yeah, you know, a lot of these games, when they do put a black person in there, a black male lead, it's always to support the main character. It's never to tell his story or go into depth about who he is as a person or what he's about. It's always to now make him some side character, some kind of sacrificial character to rescue the main character or prop up the main character. Which means to tell me that black masculinity is very valuable if that's what you're using him for. But you don't want to make him to take over your show, so to take over what you're trying to portray, so you make him a side character at the same time, which doesn't make any sense. You know what I'm saying? If you feel that the black male masculinity is so valuable like that it's used to advertise a character, which is probably advertising the game to Western culture, which I'm going to go into in the next couple of slides. All right. People weaponize historical accuracy selectively. They only cry historical inaccuracy when someone black or non-white takes center stage, but they completely ignore historical facts when a white man becomes a samurai. In The Last Samurai of Shogun, Naruto, a Japanese manga, giving blonde-haired, blue-eyed Naruto the chosen one role, right? Because Naruto was the savior. Games insert fantasy, magic gods, dragons, and time jumps, etc. This is the surface logic people use to cover for racism, culture ego, or loss of narrative control, right? So let me break this down. Naruto, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, and he was a straight-up dumbass in that show. He had his smart, perceptive moments, but he was an idiot, right? And then he gets married to the phenotypical Japanese type chick, right? And the Japanese chick, Hinata, who matches what fits the archetype of Japanese woman that a lot of white boys look for. You know, the soft, dainty, submissive, you know, type of chick, Asian chick. She fits that. And the blonde-haired, blue-eyed dumbass falls in love with her. Meanwhile, he was simping for Sakura the whole time. And then Yasuke, oh, not Yasuke, Sasuke, which is the names rhyme, similar to each other. Sasuke, right? Sasuke fits the phenotypical Japanese person, but he was the villain in that show. His whole clan was a villain. His clan, Uchiha, Sasuke himself, fit the stereotypical Japanese people, but they were the villains. They were the evil people of the village because they had something called a Sharingan, and it gave them power and control, and it made a lot of people fear them, right? But they were the villains. They weren't the saviors. Naruto was the savior or the chosen one, even though Sasuke also came from the same lineage as the god of the ninjas. I forgot his name. I forgot how to say his name, right? They were basically brothers, but one was seen as evil, the other one was seen as good, right? But that's what it is, right? Japanese culture does this a lot, where they'll take when they want to advertise something to Western culture. So Japanese people, you don't like Yasuke, but you love Naruto. And you love portraying white men to be the main center focus of your culture. And the white man who's the main center focus of your culture gets your top type of chick. I don't think Japanese people actually hate white people. I think you want to integrate with them too. Why white person in Assassin's Creed makes no sense. The logic, historical base, right? African civilizations were autonomous for thousands of years, right? Setting, a white character would be seen as a colonizer, invader, or enslaver. Canonical relevance. There's no known white figure that fought to liberate Africans in pre-colonial Africa as an insider. But guess what? In Japanese culture or any other culture, right? You've always had black people or black person that was fighting to revolt, or some kind of black hero fighting to revolt and free those Africans. Or in Japanese culture, which you have Yasuke, right? And when you talk about white people, well, in Japanese culture, like The Last Samurai, that is a white person, right? So you can pick. So it would have been better for you to make a white person the savior of Japanese culture, because there's always a white person in certain, like with Fast and the Furious. There was in Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, that was a white boy becoming the dominant person in drifting, in racing. So maybe it can logically fit for Japanese culture, but it might not logically fit for African culture. So African Assassin's Creed would make no sense, right? Representation. African stories have been erased or rewritten for centuries. Pulling them with black leads is woke is restorative, right? So comparing Yasuke in Japan, which is historically documented, to a white hero in Africa, which is fantasy projection, is false equivalence. And I told you the logic on why. I dare you to defeat it. Real talk conclusion. Yasuke was real and deserves a strong story in gaming. If Assassin's Creed is fictional, let the same rules apply to black characters as they have for white ones for years. If Noe is the main character, don't tokenize Yasuke just to get black points for centering the story on someone fictional. People throw woke around not to protect historical accuracy, but to gatekeep power, identity, and narrative control. My point about Noe's racial dynamics is also deep. Even in Japanese media, white-coded features get hero treatment, while darker, more ethnic-looking characters are villains. That's not random. That's embedded visual program. You ever notice that how even the darker characters in Naruto, what's his name? Yurakage, right? You ever notice that he's rapping? You know what I'm saying? He's rapping and rhyming. And if you watch a lot of Japanese hentai or MTR porn, it make him he's cucking everybody's bitch. He's fucking everybody's girl. This is how Japanese culture view black men, but they don't view white men the same way. Even though white men are more likely to fuck Japanese bitch than a nigga will. White men love going to Japan and the Philippines and all these different Asian countries and doing all kind of pornographic or debauchery to your women. But somehow black men y'all always making content about black men fucking your girl or fucking somebody else's wife in Japanese culture. I don't understand. Oh, yes, Yasuke, if you wanted to do it, I said it earlier, if you want to do a real story about Yasuke, you could have made a game outside of the Assassin's Creed universe and make a game separate to him. Set it around him. You understand? Mario is a perfect example. Mario is an Italian plumber created by a Japanese developer. His mission: save a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Princess Peach from a giant lizard. He's been Japan's flagship global mascot for almost 40 years. Japanese people, like, come on, bro. You can't get mad at Yasuke if you're doing this. Think about it. He doesn't look Japanese. He doesn't sound Japanese. He's never been critiqued as unrealistic in Japanese fantasy world. But Yasuke, a real African man documented in Japanese history, is where people start crying foul. So you mean tell me you couldn't create a Japanese male plumber that saves a Japanese woman? That's both phenotypical to your culture, and I don't understand. You couldn't make a Japanese culture Mario game and call it Hanzo or Hisashi? I don't get it. But Yasuke, a real African man documented in Japanese history, is where people start crying foul. That's not logic. That's racial discomfort with black masculinity being centered in a noble or heroic light. That's exactly what that is. Examples of white-coded leads in Japanese media: Resident Evil, right? Chris Redfield, Leon Kennedy, Jill Valentine, that's Capcom. Devil May Cry, Dante, that's Capcom again. Metal Gear Solid, that's Kojomi production. Basically, all of these are Japanese companies created by Japanese artists and game production studios, right? Japanese studios have repeatedly made white or Western-looking characters the lead, sometimes even in worlds based on non-European settings. This is why Afro-Caribbean, or mainly Jamaican or Haitian, and Black Americans, you should not be upset with the fact that Japanese culture or Chinese culture or Asian people are imitating you, because we get to influence them. And whenever they create content, it's going to be a reflection of what they learn from us. Just like it's a reflection of them, of what they learn from whiteness or Western culture. So if you ever wanted to defeat white supremacy, this is how you do it, right? Through influence, not domination or force, right? And it's actually better because now other groups of people get to see the humanity of Black people in the African diaspora, right? And it's an honest imitation. Feel me? This is not hate on Japan, but we need to be honest. Japanese media has historically idolized whiteness, both physical traits and heroic archetypes. In anime, white skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair are often given a pure or chosen character. Meanwhile, darker skinned characters, even Japanese one, are more likely to be villains. Sasuke, Uchiha clan, Trailblaze, Barret from Final Fantasy, comic relief of brutish Mr. Popo from Dragon Ball Z, which is straight up blackface, right? So a black character is elevated to center stage, especially in Japanese history. It disrupts the subconscious and racial coding many fans have internalized, right? Final talk, right? Unspoken racial hierarchy in global pop culture, and a right to do it. Japanese creators are not afraid to center white-coded characters in their own games, often romanticizing Western aesthetics. Why is it you don't make Japanese center coded in your characters? Since the Asian community is complaining about white people culture appropriating you, why do y'all center that stuff into your culture and into your game and into your characters? Right? Why do you need Yasuke to represent Japanese culture? You could have just did that on your own, right? With your own Japanese men. Because you could use a Japanese men to promote Nai, but you understood that Japanese men in your culture who are more patriarchal would not tolerate that. So you have to use a blackface to do that. And this is why I say Assassin's Creed Shadows is disrespect to Yasuke. But when a black man gets just one major role, even when he was actually part of the Japanese history, it becomes controversial. That's not about historical accuracy. That's about comfort zones, cultural ego, and internalized global white supremacy, even in non-white societies, right? So Japanese culture, that's what you're doing. While Asian people are bashing white supremacy, you're also promoting it at the same time. Right? Mario's an Italian plumber made by Japanese developers saving a blonde princess from a turtle, and that's okay. But a real black man who served a Japanese warlord, suddenly that's unrealistic, miss me with that hypocrisy. And see this part right here, but a real black man who served a Japanese warlord, that's why I say that Yasuke is disrespect to Yasuke. Because it's not a black man that us over here in the African diaspora can identify with. Because us over here in the African diaspora, we've been fighting to free ourselves from our masters, the slave masters. And even though Nobunaga didn't treat Yasuke like a slave, or he valued Yasuke, he's still in service of somebody else in a foreign land. He's not of service to his brothers and sisters over here in the African diaspora. What is a retainer? In feudal Japan, a retainer, kenshin, was not a lowly servant a slave. Retainers were trusted vessels who served a daimyo warlord like Oda Nobunaga. They were often samurai warriors with responsibilities ranging from battlefield command to governance. Being a retainer meant you had honor, land, and status granted to you by your lord, right? So if you're saying that Yasuke was bought by Oda Nobunaga, and Oda Nobunaga was his lord, then it makes sense to make him a trusted vessel or retainer, right? Historical records and artwork suggests Yasuke wore armor consistent with samurai retainers, not slave garb or simple servant clothes. The fact that Yasuke was granted a fief of stipend, some sources mention he was given land or some form of income, meaning Nobunaga valued him as more than a pet or servant. Nobunaga, one of the most powerful warlords, was known for rewarding loyalty and skill, not keeping pets. So the people talking about this is the logical sword that Japanese people who are racist, because not all Japanese, there was a lot of Japanese people that came out and defended Yasuke, so shout out to them, right? This is what white dudes are racist, and this is how Japanese were racist. So this is how they fall on their own sword. If you're saying that the logic is Nobunaga treated him as a pet, but Nobunaga, one of the most powerful warlords, was known for rewarding loyalty and skill, not keeping pets. That means you're not telling the proper story on Nobunaga. You're making him sound to be like a slave master instead of an actual person, an actual character worthy of storytelling about. So you're actually destroying Nobunaga's image than actually respecting it, because he valued loyalty and skill. And remember, Yasuke, he was a bodyguard for, I think, a Jesuit, and he already had skills and strength before. So why would Nobunaga just keep him as a pet? Why was Yasuke more than a slave or a pet? The Jesuits' account of Japanese chronicles highlight that Yasuke was physically imposing, intelligent, and capable in combat. qualities that earn Nobunaga's respect. Being foreign and black, Yasuke's unique presence alone was extraordinary. But Nobunaga's treatment went beyond fascination. It was recognition of his value as a warrior and retainer. The fact Yasuke was entrusted with a bodyguard duty speaks to the trust Nobunaga placed in him. Bodyguards were elite and loyal retainers, not mere servants. Right? Context. You know what I think it is? I think the world has an issue with giving black men any kind of respect or treating him like a human being. The way how white dudes responded to Yasuke's character in the game, and they can hide it behind whatever philosophical bullshit they want to hide it behind. You guys just hate the fact that it's a black face being treated like a human being. But you expect us to treat white dudes like a human being. But you don't treat other people like human beings. Many samurai were promoted from commoner or mercenary ranks, especially during the Sengoku period, the Warring States era. Hiring skilled retainers regardless of origin was common. Loyalty and effectiveness mattered more than birth. Yasuke fits this pattern as a foreign-born warrior who earned his place through service and loyalty. Now, mind you, white people are going to make the same logic about John Henry Blackthorne or any other white person that became a samurai within Japanese culture. They're going to use this. But I bet you they're not going to use this when it comes to Yasuke. This is why I call all of this shit logical hypocrisies. Minimizing Yasuke's role is a form of erasure. Calling him a pet or slave strips him of his agency, achievements, and honor. If we dismiss black excellence historical narratives, by contrast, calling him a retainer samurai restores his rightful place in history and gives black people a heroic figure to relate to, which, and honestly, you can't relate to Yasuke. Black people in the African diaspora that has been the most enslaved and most dehumanized group when it comes to the Afro-Caribbean, because Jamaican slavery was brutal. Caribbean slavery was brutal. And then what Black Americans went through, that was brutal too, right? They can't identify with Yasuke because Yasuke was treated better than how the Black Americans or Afro-Caribbeans were treated. So we can't really identify with him. Retainer was no slave or pet. It was a trusted samurai, warrior granted armor, land, and honor. Yasuke's armor duties and reward prove Nobunaga's valued him as a peer, not a pet. This is where I get into how Ubisoft is disrespecting Yasuke. Ubisoft using Yasuke as a check mark for black representation. Ubisoft doesn't include Yasuke as a real black historical figure, but relegates him to a side role supporting Noi, a fictional Japanese female lead. This allows Ubisoft to claim we have black representation without having to develop major black lead stories in other important historical contexts: Haitian Revolution, Jamaican revolts, Black American resistance. So Ubisoft might avoid telling stories centered around black heroes in African diaspora or Americas because they feel covered by Yasuke's inclusion. Right. This is where I bet you nobody's going to make this argument that I'm making because y'all are being disingenuous. This is the argument you can make about having a proper black representation from Ubisoft, making black characters. This is the argument you can make. Nobody's going to break it down like I broke it down here because you don't like seeing a black nigga being the lead of anything, of any culture. But you love seeing white men the lead of everybody's culture and fucking your main bitch. That's what it is. Yeah, I can use all the white boys. You can use all the bibble babble bullshit you wish to use. We know what it is. This is what you can say. And nobody's going to break it down the way I'm about to break it down in the next couple of slides. Watch this. Nai's role in marketing overshadows Yasuke. The game marketing focuses on Nai, while Yasuke's background are secondary. No, even mind you, they're complaining more about Yasuke than they complain about Nai being made up. Why? Because if Nai was made up and it had a white person that was made up, I bet you they would accept it. This seems to be a business decision targeting female lead for broader appeal, but at the cost of black masculinity being center stage. It risks tokenizing Yasuke or using him as a tool rather than honoring his story fully, right? Right, so double standard in the reception of black male and Japanese female parent. A black man paired with a Japanese female character causes backlash from Western and Japanese audience, whereas a white man paired with a Japanese female, example John Henry Blackthorne and Shogun, is widely accepted and even celebrated. This reveals racial discomfort, often unspoken with Black men being romantic or heroic alongside Asian women. You know why? Because now, when you make a Black man being romantic with other Black women or any other group of women or white women, it takes him away from being that slave or that brutish barbarian that society in America, especially with The Color Purple, that was directed by a small hat person and starred by Black women. Mind you, Western culture has demonized Black men. Society on the world stage has demonized Black men. And even the Black men who don't fit that stereotype, they still put them in that demonized box. So now, if you put a Black man and he's being romantic to an Asian woman, it takes him out of that light. Even when you put him being romantic to a Black woman in Black culture or in American culture, and that Black woman is respecting him and loving him, that also takes that Black man out of the demonized light or the bad light. It puts him in a better light. It makes him human. So I think the world just hates Black men being humanized. Right? By the way, now I do agree with the Japanese saying, well, you could have put a Japanese man there. Because I understand that logic with Japanese culture. Like, yo, you put this Black guy here to represent our culture, then you put him alongside our Japanese woman. And Japanese men have a right to complain about that. But why are Japanese men not complaining about the white guys that get paired up with your top Japanese female? Y'all never complain about that. Whether it's a Korean chick or a Chinese chick, you never complain about the white man being the one to be able to pick the top best Asian woman in your shows or in your games. So that's fault is on Japanese culture or Asian culture. Right? You see it all the time. It was in the movie with Chris Hemsworth. What was it called? He was in India, and the baddest Indian chick had a love interest with the white dude. I think it's called Extraction or something like that. It was the same thing there. So, I don't know. Selective historical validation. People readily accept John Henry Blackthorne becoming a samurai for his skills, despite not being Japanese by blood. But the same logic is denied a question for Yasuke, even though historical records support his samurai retainer status. This is a clear example of racial double standards in validating Black men's agency and honor, right? Because you don't want Black men to be nothing more than a slave. You don't want them to be a human being, right? Representation about more than just inclusion. It's about narrative agency and respect. Using Yasuke as a side character to promote a fictional female lead can feel like a cop-out or a checkmark, rather than a celebration of a true Black hero. This pattern echoes broader cultural erasure. Black stories get sidelined or diluted, especially when they challenge the comfort zones of dominant racial or gender narratives. It's important to recognize how corporate interests often shape storytelling. Decisions that prioritize marketability over authenticity or meaningful Black representation, right? Now, you got to remember, corporate is going to do what they feel or what they see is in culture that, is making the money to make the profit. So now if the majority of Western culture is being woke and all that stuff, they're going to make stories and prioritize that over, being authentic. Because again, I love Yasuke's stories, but he doesn't represent the stories of Black men in the African diaspora. Make Yasuke the true main protagonist with a full story exploring his background, struggles, and impact. Develop games that tell authentic stories of Black heroes in African and diasporic history, not just token appearances in other cultures' history. Address the normalized Black-Asian partnership in media without racial discomfort or court backlash. By the way, Asian women are a smaller group and Black men are even smaller group. And them dating each other is even at a smaller rate. So I don't understand what the issue is with that is. White men date Asian women at a higher rate than Black dudes do. So I don't understand that. I don't know what your issue is. Ubisoft gave us Yasuke, a real Black samurai, but only to back up a fictional Japanese female lead. Now they can say we did black representation while ignoring powerful black stories from the diaspora. And when black men get paired with Asian women, some fans freak out. But they never said a word when white men did the same thing centuries ago. This is about control, comfort, and coded racism, hiding behind historical accuracy. Right? They got us hiding it behind historical accuracy. And I can see it, right? I'm just breaking it down. Because like you get it if you said historical accuracy and you know Yasuke wasn't a real person. If Yasuke was a made-up person, then I can agree that it's not historical accuracy. And I would completely disagree with Ubisoft. But Yasuke is a historical person. He's accurate. He existed by different accounts. Right? Why black male-led stories from diaspora matter? The Haitian Revolution, Jamaican Maroon rebellions, and other black-led uprisings are some of the most inspiring, untold stories of resistance in world history. And you know why? Because they resist white men. They're resisting the white supremacy here in America, and it's going to make white men look even worse if they tell these stories. That's why they're not telling them. These are stories about, because the way Ubisoft tells a lot of these stories, bro, a lot of it is amazing. Like when they told the story about the Native American in Assassin's Creed 3. Imagine you telling that story, those stories about how the Haitians use voodoo and how the Jamaicans use obia and how they tapped into their Caribbean god pantheons like Shango or Papa Legba. Shout out to the Angry Man, right? Because he talks about that. Imagine black men tapping into that warrior energy and gave you that energy from that Compa Nancy did in American Gods. Let me give you an example. Let me see. American Gods. Anansi. Let me show y'all Anansi's entrance. Show you Anansi's entrance. Let me go back over here. Share this.
You want help? Fine. Anansi. You want help?
I'm going to show you why they don't put black male deities like a Shango or Papa Legba or a Loa or a Kumpanansi. This is the main reason why they don't make an Assassin's Creed game centered around it. Can you imagine that? Hold on, let me get my face. Could you imagine that? A game telling those stories, giving black men power and strength. But that's why they're not telling those stories. Let's continue. I want to show another video. 1 second. Show another video.
Egyptians told tales of the sacred book of Ptah.
The chick, the female goddess, I think she was Nefertiti. I forgot who she was. What she was doing is she became a sex goddess, and she was using sex to gain power and validation. And in the series, she was using technology or social media to garner that attention. And what Kumpanansi just did is he checked her. What if these new gods are giving you, and what if they take it away? This is why masculinity and patriarchy is very important, because that male deity, Kumpanansi, just checked her for what she was doing. that was that, right? Could you imagine a game centered around something similar to that, but you're using deities from different timelines from here, right? Like I said, put here. These are stories about Black men and women organizing, fighting, and using culture and spirituality like voodoo to liberate themselves from oppression and slavery. Yet these narratives rarely appear in mainstream media or AAA gaming, and I showed you why. Despite their dramatic and cinematic potential. Mind you, they only show Black people in 12 Years a Slave. They don't show you fighting slavery. They don't show you rebelling against your slave master. They only show you being a slave. Ubisoft's inclusion of Yasuke, a Black samurai in feudal Japan, is historically valid, but disconnected from the Black diaspora core stories of struggle and freedom. By highlighting Yasuke, Ubisoft can say we have a Black protagonist, which might reduce incentive to invest in Black diaspora narratives like Haitian, Jamaican, or African American revolutions. This creates a false sense of representation that doesn't center the stories most relevant and powerful to the majority of Black people globally, right? Like I said, the African diaspora, Afro-Caribbean, and African American, those stories are the most potent and the most powerful, right? Black masculinities we love to see in games. Toussaint Louverture, Haitian revolution leader, strategic action game in Haitian, right? Haitian independence. Nanny of the Maroons, Jamaican warrior queen, guerrilla warfare, survival in Jamaican mountains. Dunmores, Ethiopian regiment, Black soldiers in the American Revolution, military shooter focus on Black figures role, right? Nat Turner, American slave rebellion leader, stealth action game about uprising and liberation. Zumbi dos Palomares, Brazilian, I don't know how to say that, Colombo leader, resistance and community building in colonial Brazil. Denmark Vesey, planned slaves revolt in Charleston, tactical rebellion and freedom story, right? Plenty of content, plenty of games to be made. You could kick the, if you want to use a female lead, you can use Nanny of the Maroons. Right? Kick the woke agendas out of it. You know what I'm saying? And these will be good games, right? So now this is a task for Black people. But in Black culture, we shame our technicians, we shame our intelligent people, we call them lame and square and nerds. We don't respect them. So why would they produce anything to show our history if we don't respect those type of people? But then again, what do I know, right? They provide complex, Black, masculine heroes rooted in real history, bravery, and leadership. They challenge the narrow, stereotypical portrayals often seen in media. They connect Black players to their own history and cultural identity. They can educate and inspire a wider audience about depth and resilience of Black people worldwide. Now, when I say Black masculine heroes, I mean Black patriarchal, and not the feminist lens of what patriarchy is, because feminism have tainted what patriarchy is, because they're preaching patriarchy is bad through what they experience under the leadership of white men and how they led. And not all of white male patriarchy is bad. You may have white men who misrepresented patriarchy, but not all of it is bad. So because of how white feminists are portraying patriarchy, you get a negative look on patriarchy. And now Black men are afraid to be patriarchal because of how white women define it. And again, Black men are defining themselves and preventing themselves from doing things based upon what people outside of them define of what patriarchy is, which is another problem. All right. What we've seen instead, games often ignore or sideline these stories. Ubisoft Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation with Evelyn, a Black female assassin in New Orleans, and Assassin's Creed 3 with Connor, a Native American protagonist, brushes on these errors. But Black men's stories are rarely front. Because remember, in Assassin's Creed 3, Connor, he was half French. A French nigga come fuck a Native American bitch and got him, right? And then his mentor was a Black male, but he was still a sidekick. He wasn't the main thing. But Black men's stories are rarely front and center. Black characters are often sidekicks or secondary, rarely the stars, right? Final thoughts. Using Yasuke as a black leader is historically interesting, but doesn't substitute for the massive gap in black diaspora stories in gaming. Ubisoft and others have the resources and responsibilities to tell these stories authentically, but the business side often opts for safe or exotic black characters in foreign contexts, rather than confronting their own stories of black resistance. Why African Caribbean pantheons matter in gaming? Assassin's Creed has featured Greek gods, Norse gods, and even Egyptian mythology, right? And we don't want, and even Egyptian, even though most of the people in that area was black in origin, they still give you a more lighter skinned Arab. So that's not even ours in origin, right? But what's ours in origin is in the Afro-Caribbean and in the African American, right? These mythologies are rich with stories of gods, heroes, and spirits that shape cultures and histories, right? African Caribbean spiritual tradition, they're missing Shango, the powerful Yoruba god of thunder and fire, symbolizing strength and resistance. Papa Legba, the Haitian voodoo guardian of the crossroads, a spiritual gatekeeper and protector. Kumpa Nansi, the spider, a trickster figure and storyteller from Western African folklore, embodying wisdom, cunning, and survival. Ogun, Ilegua, Oshun, and others, key Orisha's deities worshipped throughout the African diaspora, especially in Caribbean and Latin American spiritual practices. Now, you know why? You know what a folklore is in Western culture? Thor. Instead of them calling it folklore, they call it mythology. You know what other Captain America, Iron Man, instead of them calling it folklore, they call it MCU or comic books. So I'm saying they call our shit folklore, but they call their stuff comic books or mythology. See what I'm saying? But the stories on our folklore, it's like if you're in a, like say I'm Caribbean, right? I'm Jamaican, obviously, right? And even in the African American, when you used to hear the elders sit around a campfire or sit around a table and they used to tell duppy and ghost stories or folk stories, or use analogies to talk about how, you know, black people fought and they resisted. It inspired you as a black kid when I used to hear them. You understand? Similar to how if a white kid watches Captain America and he's inspired for he wants to have American values, and the Captain America inspires him to have American values, right? These deities and figures are deeply tied to resistance, survival, liberation, and identity. Themes that fit perfectly with Assassin's Creed's narrative of fighting oppression. The enslaved Africans and their descendants carry these spiritual traditions as sources of strength and rebellion during colonialism, slavery, and revolution. Including these pantheons, not only expand cultural representation, but also educate players about richness of African and African Caribbean heritage. It's a chance to center Black stories and spirituality in global culture phenomenon, other than sideline them. And the reason why I say it's you need to be Black male deities, because Black men need to be masculine. They need to have a representation that represents their masculinity and their manhood. Something that they can look into and see themselves as divine. Right? You can't do that with female deities, because in the Western now, they'll make the female Black deity usurp or circumvent or set her above the Black man. And that's already a problem for Black men, right? Because now Black culture is already matriarchal when it comes to the Black American space. And that is a big problem. Corporate hesitancy and lack of cultural understanding or fear of controversy may play a role, because with Companancy or Orlando Jones' character, they got canceled off of American Gods. So these spiritual, and the reason why it's controversial, because now it puts white men in a bad light. And they're afraid that Black men are going to uprise. And you know why they're afraid that Black men are going to uprise? Because they're still doing things against Black men that are not good. And they don't want to apologize for their actions. But anyway, these spiritual systems are often misunderstood, stereotyped, or stigmatized outside their cultural context. There may also be a business risk perception that such content won't sell, broadly or false assumption rooted in racial bias. What could happen if they did a game featuring African Caribbean pantheon? Could offer fresh gameplay mechanics like spirit-guided powers, ritual magic, and ancestral vision. It could give Black players a deeply authentic connection to their history and spirituality, It could reshape global narrative around African and diasporic spirituality, showing it as a vibrant, powerful, and relevant, right? Just like Assassin's Creed brought the Greek and Norse gods to life, it's time for African Caribbean deities, symbols of resistance and survival, to take their rightful place in gaming pantheon legends. And I don't want, if they're going to do this, do not turn this into some Marxist, communist bullshit. Keep communism and Marxism out of African or Black liberation, because Marcus Garvey showed y'all can liberate yourself through capitalism. So keep any of that stuff out of it. Just make it purely about this. Disrespect toward Black masculinity and identity. Yasuke, while a real historical figure, is using Assassin's Creed Shadows not to elevate Black culture, but to support Japanese mythology, Japanese resistance, and Japanese storytelling. He's blackface in someone else's culture, under someone else's gods, fighting someone else's battles. And this is my main talking point right here. And I bet nobody's going to break it down like this. So while he's the representation, he's disconnected from his own roots, his own gods, his own cultural identity. Let's be honest. A Viking man calls on Thor, Odin, or Norse ancestry to fuel his mission. A Greek hero calls on Zeus, Athena, and the gods of Olympus. But Black man is given Japanese folklore and shrines to bow to, not his own. So he's not bound down to something that represents him. He's bound down to something that represents somebody else's culture. This creates a spiritual displacement. It robs Black players, especially Black men, of a chance to see themselves as divine, to fight under the protection of their own gods, and to feel the power of calling on Shango, Ogun, Legba, or Naim, like others call on Thor or Hades. I bet none of you nigger YouTubers is going to break it down like I broke it, just broke it down. Y'all going to use the common everyday bullshit. The same logic that white people use that are racist. So I can't stand y'all niggas in the gaming. Why the fuck did you bring that shit into gaming? Why did y'all bring racism and woke ideology and woke agendas into gaming, when gaming was supposed to be the escape from that bullshit? Disrespect towards Japanese culture. Ironically, it also doesn't honor Japanese culture pride either. Ubisoft could have created a fully Japanese male and female protagonist rooted in their own culture, myths, and heritage. Instead, they inserted Yasuke, a foreigner, to help tell Japanese women's story. This isn't respectful inclusion. It's branding optics, choosing Black male face because they know it's trending in diversity circles, but it's not rooted in real cultural reverence, neither for Black culture nor Japanese. This is what we might call a diversity prop. Yasuke is used as a tool to make the game look inclusive while failing to go deep with either culture. This is a more balanced thinking or thought process that I brought. As I said, this echoes Marcus Garvey's wisdom. If the white man has the idea of a white God, let him worship his God as he desires. If the yellow man has the idea of a yellow God, let him worship his God as he sees fit. We as Black men believe in the God of Ethiopia, the everlasting God, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, the one God of all ages. This is the God whom we believe, but we shall worship him through the spectacles of Ethiopia. Right now, Black men don't get to see themselves reflected through their own spiritual lens in games. They're always fighting someone else's war, under someone else's gods, for someone else's cultural benefit. This strips the spiritual and cultural autonomy that others are allowed to keep intact. Because there's a power when a Black man sees a God that looks like him and favors him, and he's fighting a war that benefits his community. And he's under the protection of a God that looks like him, and it's for his own benefit instead of other people's. And he has his own autonomy. There's power in that. What needs to happen? Tell stories of Black men leading their own revolutions. Feature African diaspora pantheons like Yoruba, Aken, Voodoo, Congo spirituality. Let Black men pray to their gods, call on their ancestors, and fight in the name of their people. Let us see ourselves as divine, not just diverse. And Black women, take 1,000 seats the fuck back. This is for Black men and the restoration of Black masculinity. And Black women, you have contributed to the destruction of your Black men's image because you chose to follow a white bitch and a dumbass thinking. So Black women, we don't care. I personally, I don't care about what represents you, because you have not cared about what represents Black men. Instead, you black women prefer your black men to bow to you and to kiss. You know what? Final critique. Yasuke was treated like a collector's item, not a revolutionary hero. Even though Yasuke was admired by Oda Nobunaga, he wasn't part of a brotherhood. He wasn't a symbol of black sovereignty, culture, or liberation. He was a foreign warrior in a foreign land. Let me say that again. He was a foreign warrior in a foreign land, fighting someone else's war, and ultimately discarded when his usefulness ended, which is the saddest part to me about about Yasuke, excuse me. Yasuke, after Oda Nobunaga got defeated, he got casted out. And then he faded into mystery. You have real black heroes in the Afro-Caribbean, in the Afro-Caribbean, and you have real black heroes in Black American spaces that have fathered generations of minds and influenced generations of minds that are still real. They haven't faded into mystery, but Yasuke has. And that's why it's a disrespect to Yasuke and to black masculinity. Because we don't need mystery. He wasn't fighting for his people. Yasuke wasn't protecting Africa. He wasn't defending the Caribbean. He wasn't liberating the enslaved in the Americas. Instead, he was defending the legacy of a feudal Japanese warlord, no matter how respected. I bet none of you white boys going to come up with that. I bet none of you Negro content creators going to come up with that. Yasuke, he was alone. Yasuke wasn't in a black brotherhood. He didn't have black ancestors guiding him or African gods empowering him. He had no community, spirituality, or lineage to stand on. He was, in effect, a solitary black face surrounded by another culture's legacy. He became a mystery, not a martyr. After Nobunaga's death, Yasuke was reportedly rejected by Nobunaga's successor and simply disappeared from history. There's no statue, no legend, no shrine to him in Japan. His story was not celebrated in Africa or the black diaspora either. In the end, he was a collector's item, displayed, used, and forgotten. You can't forget Malcolm X. You can't forget Marcus Garvey. And you have Minister Farrakhan, who's still alive today. The big problem, if this is the only major story of a black male led Ubisoft is willing to tell, that it's not representation, it's displacement. Yasuke is a perfect symbol of how black masculinity is often portrayed in Western media. Strong, capable, but ultimately used to support other people's agendas, and then left behind when the job is done. Isn't that the Black American story? They used y'all during the civil rights era, or the LGBT use your civil rights platform and don't give a fuck about you either after that? What about the 1877 compromise, where the Republicans stab you in the back, and then the Southern Democrats use that opportunity to destroy you, even though you fought in that civil war? Black men don't need to be collector's items in someone else's museum. They need to be seen as kings, warriors, and revolutionaries in their own right, with their own gods, our own causes, and their own land. Every time I'm doing these videos, some interruption this presents itself. Black men don't need to be collector's items. Let me read this again. Black men don't need to be collector's items in someone else's museum. We need to be seen as kings, warriors, and revolutionaries in our own right, with our own gods, our own causes, and our own land. This is what Marcus Garvey was talking about when he was talking about, using capitalism as a liberation. These are some heroes that we can use. Taki's rebellion leader, right? This is the Jamaican leader, right? A former Ashanti at Ken Royal from West Africa, who was enslaved and brought to Jamaica, known for initiating one of the most famous large-scale slave uprisings in Jamaican history. Why he's important? In 1760, Taki led a group of enslaved Africans in St. Mary's Parish in an armed revolt. He seized firearms, took over plantations, and freed many. His rebellion later inspired uprisings across the islands. Taki is revered in Jamaican history as a symbol of African resistance and pride. His rebellion showed that enslaved Africans retained leadership, strategy, and military skill. Perfect character for Afro-Caribbean, right? Kojo, leader of the Maroons, who he was, a key Maroon war chief who led the leeward Maroons, escaped Africans living in Jamaican mountains, right? Why he's important. Led sustained guerrilla warfare against British colonial forces in the early 1700s, forced the British to sign the 1739 Maroon Treaty, granting Maroons autonomy and land. Legacy, seen as the founding father of free black Jamaica. Kojo represents freedom, military genius, and political negotiations. Samuel Sharp, leader of the 1831 Baptist War. Christmas Rebellion, who he was, a literate Baptist deacon and enslaved preacher who led the largest slave revolt in Jamaica. Why he's important. Organized a general strike in 1831 to protest working conditions and demand freedom. His protests escalated in rebellion involving up to 60,000 enslaved people. Though the rebellion was crushed, it shocked Britain and accelerated their abolition of slavery. Legacy declared a national hero of Jamaica. His last words were, "I would rather die upon yonder gallows than live in slavery." That's a powerful quote. We need a game of black men echoing that. I'm going to read that again. I would rather die upon yonder gallows than live in slavery. Ain't that what Killmonger said in Black Panther? That's black liberation. Not this bullshit, woke bullshit you house Negroes, you communist Marxist Negroes is telling. This is why y'all don't like Jamaican niggas in Black America. Because if we speak to the Black American brother, we're going to tell him the same shit. We're going to speak to him about freeing himself. And a lot of you boule Negroes, you want to be the new slave master of niggas. The long people outside, so I have to mute my mic. You want to be the new slave master of Negro. Now these brothers are Kompong, Kofi, Kuro, and Johnny. Who they were? Now, we need to tell the stories of these brothers, right? Because we always hear of Nani, but we never heard of what her brothers did, right? The male siblings of the Queen Nani of Maroon, who each led different Maroon groups in resistance against the British. Notably, accompanying the Maroon town of Akampong, also Akampong. Okay, so Akampong that's actually, I didn't even know this, right? Akampong, right, is what was one of the brothers to Nani, right? Then you have Kofi, Q, and Johnny. Kofi, some sources say he also influenced revolts in Barbados, modern-day Guyana. Co-led with the Queen Nani in the Windward Maroons war efforts. Legacy, often overshadowed by their sister Nani, but they were key generals and community leaders, right? So it's important to tell these stories right here. Jack Manson, Three-Finger Jack, the rebel folk hero. Who he was, a feared and legendary runaway slave and rebel fighter during the late 1700s. Why he's important. Known for living in Jamaican hills and waging guerrilla tactics on colonial forces and slave owners, became a symbol of fear to the British and a folk hero to the oppressed. Three-Finger Jack or Jack Manson, bro. Let me look at this. Three-Finger. You even have hotels made after him too in Jamaica. Let me show you how this. You mean to tell me you can't make a game out of this? Now, this is up to black people to make this game, not white people. You want to tell your stories in your game, you got to make it yourself. Three-Finger Jack is a legendary figure in Jamaica. His story was based on the life of a real person, a man who escaped from slavery sometime before 1780, became the leader of a group of Maroons in the Blue Mountain region of that island and was eventually captured and killed. Let me see if they have any images of him. Oh, they do. Three-Finger Jack. You see this? Jamaican National Trust Commission erected a monument to the memory of Jack Monsong, a man who was known as a Robin Hood type character, but also inspired fear among the colonial powers. Among Monsong's activities was robbing the male occupants of carriages, but leaving the women and children alone, or certainly surrounds his origins, but his life was source material for many books. Theoretical representations. It is believed that Monsong was a slave and a guerrilla fighter named the Three-Finger Jack. He was active in Jamaica from about 1780 to 1781. According to the historical market installed in 1978, Jack was strong, brave, skilled with a machete or musket, and his exploits were equaled only by his chivalry. Books about him were bestsellers in Britain, and he was called the Terror of Jamaica. There was considerable doubt about everything associated with Monsong, even his name, although since he was a slave, it is certain he was of African ancestry. It is said he escaped from a plantation in St. Mary and that he was originally from Gambia. Legend has it he was a giant who stood nearly 7 feet tall. He was called Three-Finger Jack after losing 2 fingers in a fight with Cushy, a maroon ultimately credited with killing him. He shred as much for being a strong fighter as for his obia. And after his death, his enemies decapitated him, put his head on a spike, and carried it to Morant Bay, then to Spanish Town to collect a reward. His story needs to be told. His story needs to be told. But will they tell it? Will black people tell it? No. Jamaicans. This is what makes me upset with Jamaicans in our culture, because we're more focused on badman culture and debauchery in our culture. We're not focused on telling these stories like Jack Monsong or Three-Finger Jack. I don't know why. And then we shame the debaucherous men that are responsible for the acidic culture. Shout out to Politics Watch. In our culture, they're the ones that get called the real niggas or the best of the best in our culture. But the black men who can create technology and build video games, they're called the lame, or they're called square, or the boring. You need black men who can make video games and create technology so that they can build games or build games off of characters like Three-Finger Jack. But we don't do that. All right? Best believe if I had the knowledge on how to do these things, I would do it. I myself would get a group of Jamaican people, and we create games based off of this stuff. Right? Why is he important? Known for living in Jamaica Hills and Range, so I already read that. Became a symbol of fear to the British and a folk hero to be oppressed. Legacy, immortalized in Jamaican oral history and folklore, seen as the Jamaican version of the Django, wild, fearless, and anti-colonial. Why these men matter in games and media? Their stories are cinematic, deeply tied to warfare, rebellion, spirituality, and freedom fighting. They deserve their own Assassin's Creed style art, rooted in Caribbean terrain, maroon warfare, and African spirituality. Black men need to see themselves not just surviving, but leading, fighting, and liberating their people. Haitian voodoo. In Haiti, enslaved Africans combined Western African voodoo, Congo beliefs, and Catholicism to form voodoo, often misrepresented in the Western media, right? But they don't. But when you look at people like my man, what's his name in the Avengers, the magician dude, or even the Scarlet Witch, they don't look at Scarlet Witch and her shit as voodoo, but they look at our stuff as voodoo, right? Loa, right? Royal symbolism. Papa Legba, guardian of the spirit world, open of doors between worlds. He's the first spirit you must speak to before others. Ezio Danto, fierce mother goddess, protector of black women and children, represents strength and rage, often compared to the spirit of Haitian revolution. Ogun, god of war, iron and rebellion. Black men called on Ogun for strength in battle, patron of warriors and revolutionaries. Baron Samedi. I think Baron Samedi, he was featured in The flipping lawn people decide to now mow lawn while I'm doing this video. Like, serious? I think Sam D, that was a gang in the game called Saints Row. I don't know if you remember that. But Baron Samedi, Lord Death and the afterlife, but also resurrection, often depicted in a top hat. He's the gatekeeper of the grave. Damballa, serpent deity, represents peace and wisdom, one of the oldest gods. Historical note, during the Bois Kemen ceremony that sparked the Haitian Revolution in 1791, enslaved rebels called on Izil and Ogu to bless the rebellion and spill the blood of their enemies. Right? Like, if you make a game, Ubisoft don't even have to make the game. This could be made by Haitians or a combination of Caribbean people, Afro-Caribbean, can make this game. Obia and African retention. In Jamaica, the enslaved didn't create an organized religion like voodoo, but they practiced Obia, which was more individualistic and secretive. Obia isn't a religion, it's a spiritual science of resistance, protection, cursing, and healing rooted in the Ghanaian, Congo, or Igbo tradition. Right? Shango, Yoruba thunder god, worshipped via retention from African slaves, seen as powerful, masculine, warlike, and righteous. Ogun, god of iron, war, and justice, similar to Ogu in voodoo, called upon in maroon warfare. Anansi, or Kupanansi, West African trickster, spider god, brought by Akan slaves, not a warrior, but a symbol of outsmarting the oppressor through cunning. Mela spirits, healing and ancestral spirits used to combat Obia when used negatively. Melism later merged with revival churches. I want to say that a lot of the Christian churches in Jamaica, a lot of them have what you call Melism, right? Where, they'll use certain practices to counteract Obia. You see it in America. You go. If a lot of you Caribbean kids like myself, when you grew up and you watch a lot of your elders trying to expel or rebuke negative spirits, a lot of that is voodoo spirits. They're just not going to admit it. They're using Obia positively to counteract negative Obia. They're just not going to admit that. I remember growing up, and they would have people in churches or revival churches in Caribbean culture, and if it was a woman or a dude and they were being what you call possessed by negative spirits, they would use similar practices to rebuke those evil spirits. They're just not going to admit it, right? Jamaican Maroons, especially in the mountains, retain many Akan and Congo practices and worship spiritual ancestors and gods of old. They believe in communicating with spirits using herbs and invoking power from the natural world, right? Shared African roots across the Caribbean. Whether it's Haiti, Jamaica, Trinidad, or the U.S. South, many of these same deities' ideas show up under different names because the slaves came from similar ethnic groups: Yoruba, Fon, Igbo, Akan, and Congo. African culture, right? Yoruba, Nigeria, Fon, Benin, Congo, Akan, Ghana, right? So this is showing you, even in Cuba, Brazil, right? Voodoo, Haitian voodoo, Minsky spirits, voodoo and Obia. So, this is why it's important for Black people to retain our own stuff. Right? If you want to break the spell of white supremacy, you have to adopt your own stuff and be proud in adopting your own stuff. Right? These deities weren't just gods, they were weapons of spiritual warfare. Enslaved Black people called on Shango, Ogun, Izil, and Legbo for strength, strategy, and vengeance. It gave them identity, power, and purpose, even when the colonizers stripped away everything else. These gods were proof that Black people were never truly slaves, just warriors in captivity. That shit is powerful. All right. So, let me come off that. Let me put my face up here. So just imagine you have a video game with all the modern technology that we have, and you create a game centered around all of that I've spoken. That is actually more powerful. And you make movies, you make entertainment like the MCU, you make a sort of liberation, black liberation squad, like the Justice League. And you put all the black faces on it, and you put all the deities on it, and the different powers you generate from those deities. And you put it in a game or a movie, that's powerful. And you keep Marxism and communism the fuck out of it. Right? You put Marcus Garvey in it, and he's teaching y'all how to use economics and capitalism to liberate you. That'd be a powerful game. That'd be something powerful, something magnificent to see. Then these side characters you make, like Yasuke. But anyway, this is the end of my video. Remember, I'm Kish, Yardy Nation Gaming. Like, share, subscribe to the channel. You know, I'm on, and stay tuned for more content. I think I'm going to be making more vlogging videos than I do live videos, right? But I think my vlogs, they reach more people and more views than my live videos, right? So, you know, shout out to you guys. Kish, Yardy Gaming Nation.